At dawn on the 4th of June 1943, a thin mist covered the surface of Chesapeake Bay. The Liberty ship carrying German prisoners of war drifted slowly into Norfolk Harbor, Virginia. On deck, Unteroffizier Hermann Butcher rested his hands on the rail, his legs trembling slightly after 14 days crossing the Atlantic. After 3 years of fighting in the North African desert, he could not imagine that the place he was about to set foot on was the industrial heart of a democratic nation. Below, hundreds of workers moved like the links of a massive machine. The sounds of cranes, steam whistles, and loudspeakers merged into a rhythm not of war, but of vitality. At that time, the Norfolk Naval Base was the largest naval base in the world, spanning over 4,300 acres, with piers, warehouses, fuel tanks, and warship repair zones. According to the U.S. Navy Port Operations Report, June 1943, in just one morning, the port could handle more than 30,000 tons of cargo, surpassing the weekly capacity of Hamburg Harbor. That figure stunned the German officers aboard the ship. They had been trained to believe that Americans were technically weak and dependent on machines, yet what they witnessed was a system operating with cold precision. In the dim sunlight, Butcher saw groups of white and black workers jointly operating cranes. Women in overalls, their hair neatly tied, maneuvered machinery with the confidence of engineers. Children sold newspapers at the harbor gate, copies of the Virginian Pilot bearing the headline, "Allied Advance Continues in North Africa." No one seemed afraid at the sight of the arriving prisoners. A black American man pushing a cart stopped, looked, and nodded in greeting. Amid the silence of the Wehrmacht ranks, Butcher quietly said in German, "Die Spinnen. Die Amerikaner." The Americans are crazy. But it was not contempt, it was genuine bewilderment. According to U.S. War Department port reports, 1943, the first intake included 2,500 prisoners from the Afrika Korps, captured in Tunisia after the Kasserine campaign. They were the first German prisoners to set foot on American soil, brought to Norfolk for medical inspection, bathing, and registration before being moved inland. The procedures were carried out swiftly and orderly, involving Navy personnel, military police, and representatives of the International Red Cross. Each man received a prisoner card, an identification number, a health check, and his first meal in America. The harbor scene felt surreal. A U.S. Army band was playing Chattanooga Choo Choo for a war bond drive, right beside the area where prisoners stood in line. In the distance, cranes moved ceaselessly, unloading oil drums and ammunition crates. No one seemed to pay attention to the presence of thousands of German prisoners. According to the 9th Naval District Report, June 1943, civilian workers were permitted within sight of enemy personnel, without restrictions or armed guards. To the German military, such a thing was unimaginable. Butcher recorded in his memoir Behind Barbed Wire, 1952, "I expected shouting, spitting, but they did nothing. They just worked, ate lunch, and talked to each other." He wrote that while standing in line, a female worker passed by carrying a lunchbox, and the scent of a sandwich drifted through the air. That smell reminded him of 1,939 inches Dresden, before the war had stolen the very idea of a peaceful meal. "She looked at me, smiled, and went on," he wrote. "That was the first time I realized we had lost something larger than the war." According to the Norfolk Base Engineering Log, 1943, at the time of Butcher's arrival, the port's facilities included 19 operating piers, 12 electric cranes, 2,600 military trucks, and an internal rail network of 38 miles. That precision reflected an entirely different industrial philosophy. Where Germans revered craftsmanship, Americans worshipped mass production. A German technical officer noted in a report sent to the prisoner command in Geneva, "This port system could swallow the entire weekly output of the Ruhr without pausing for a minute." The prisoners who had once believed in the doctrine of industrial eugenics that only Germans could reach the pinnacle of engineering began to see that belief falter. What they saw was not the rigid militarization of Hamburg or Kiel, but a civilian economy where workers labored alongside soldiers, where order was maintained through habit, not fear. A society so secure in its power that it could act casual about war, wrote American journalist Milton Bracker in the New York Times, the 6th of June 1943, capturing that very spirit. That noon, the prisoners were brought to temporary barracks within the port for their first meal on American soil. The meal included cold cuts, mashed potatoes, white bread, and coffee. According to quartermaster records, Norfolk Station, June 1943, the prisoners' ration equaled that of an American soldier on duty about 3,300 calories. Butcher wrote, "When the spoon touched the cold cream on the cake, I froze. The taste of milk was almost forbidden in my memory." For a man from war-starved Europe, that sensation struck at his pride. In the afternoon, as the trucks carrying the prisoners left the harbour, Butcher looked back one last time at the piers. In the distance, American flags waved alongside Navy flags on the warships. Music still played from loudspeakers, mingling with the sound of cranes. There was no hostility, no fear, only the steady rhythm of a society fighting without losing its normalcy, according to the U.S. Navy Historical Center, Norfolk in 1943 handled more than 2 million tons of military cargo for Atlantic operations, a number beyond the imagination of any German officer. That evening, the prisoners were taken to the medical intake area. Electric lights illuminated the concrete corridor. Butcher recalled, "I saw my reflection on the floor, so clean it seemed unreal." In Germany, even military hospitals rarely had lights burning through the night. Small details, the light, the scent of soap, the sound of a radio in the waiting room made him realize that this world operated under a different principle. Order without whips, discipline without threats. In the archives of the International Red Cross Mission Report, July 1943, Inspector Guy Matro wrote a short note. Prisoners arrived at Norfolk expressed disbelief at the normality around them. The phrase, "the normality around them," was underlined twice. It summarized the entire experience of men like Butcher. Their first shock of civilization came not from weapons or machines, but from the ordinary life of wartime America. As the convoy left the base gate toward the detention camp at Fort Meade, the sun sank low, reflecting off the Elizabeth River like shards of molten metal. Butcher turned to his comrade and said, "If this is how they treat prisoners, I fear we have understood nothing about them." That remark, recorded in his 1952 memoir, marked the beginning of a profound shift in perception that hundreds of thousands of German prisoners would undergo in the years to come. And in that silence, the old certainties died. On the 5th of June 1943, after their first night at the Norfolk Reception Center, the group of German prisoners of war was awakened by the clang of a metal bell echoing through the barracks. They lined up under the early sunlight, facing a row of American officers in navy blue uniforms. On the table lay thick folders and boards printed with the words, "Geneva Convention of 1929. The camp commander, Major Robert L. Chambers, began the briefing in fluent German. "You have the right to be treated as soldiers, not criminals," he said, his voice clear and firm. According to the U.S. Provost Marshal General's report, June 1943, every group of prisoners arriving in America was required to hear an explanation of their rights under the Geneva Convention, covering everything from food rations, labor, and religion to correspondence with family. The scene puzzled many Germans. In the Wehrmacht's model, prisoners were a burden, faceless entities to be exploited for information and then discarded. In Norfolk, by contrast, the meticulousness bordered on ritual. They read each clause as if it were a law of nature, Butcher recalled in his memoir, Behind Barbed Wire, 1952. An American asked if I needed a kosher ration. I thought he was mocking me, but he noted it down seriously, with complete sincerity. According to the International Red Cross Bulletin, July 1943, American officers were trained to explain the Geneva regulations in the prisoner's own language, viewing knowledge of the law as part of a moral victory. After the briefing, the prisoners were taken to the medical ward. The room was brightly lit, its whitewashed walls smelling of disinfectant. Each man stepped past the examination table to have his blood pressure taken, be weighed, and x-rayed. An American doctor told me to take a deep breath and said, "Relax." I didn't know what the word meant, but his tone made me forget I was a captive, Butcher wrote. According to the Red Cross Medical Inspection Report, July 1943, all prisoners arriving at Norfolk were given a full medical examination within 48 hours, including blood tests, vaccinations, and treatment for wounds. What astonished the German officers most was the kind of medicine they received. The Red Cross report stated clearly, German prisoners received penicillin for wound infections. Penicillin, then a miracle drug, newly mass-produced in the United States, was still extremely scarce in Europe. Even German field hospitals rarely possessed it. According to the U.S. Army Medical Department Journal, 1943, the penicillin supply was prioritized for American troops, but a small portion was allocated to prisoners of war to ensure equal medical treatment. That equality, in essence, was a political statement. While Nazi Germany treated medicine as a tool for racial classification, the Americans used it as a language of humanity. One incident recorded in the Norfolk Base Medical Diary, the 12th of June 1943, tells of an African-American nurse, Private First Class Nathaniel Brooks, who drew blood from 2 Wehrmacht officers for malaria testing. They initially refused, claiming, "German law forbids black men from touching Aryan soldiers." Brooks stayed silent, performed the procedure, finished, and smiled. "Good day, sir. Your results will be ready in 2 days." The prisoner stared at him for a long moment, saying nothing. Days later, they were sent for chest x-rays. The silence between them spoke of a paradox greater than war itself, the reversal of moral hierarchies. In America, a black man could heal a German officer. In Berlin, that very act would have been a crime. According to the International Red Cross Mission Report, July 1943, on average, one doctor served 500 prisoners, a ratio twice as high as the Geneva Convention's requirement, 1/1000. Each medical unit was equipped with an X-ray machine, surgical tools, and its own dispensary. In a confidential report to Geneva, Inspector Guy Matro noted, "Medical treatment provided to German POWs equals or exceeds that of American troops." The phrase "equals or exceeds" was underlined 3 times. It reflected the official view that the United States wielded humanity as a soft weapon to prove the superiority of its civilization through its treatment of the enemy. When the examinations were completed, the prisoners were given clean clothes, hot showers, and shaves. They were led to the lunch area, where Navy cooks served stew, vegetables, bread, and black coffee. "No one fought over food, no one shouted," Butcher recalled. An American said, "Enjoy your meal. I didn't understand all of it, but I knew he wasn't mocking me." According to the Quartermaster Corps records, Norfolk Station, July 1943, the average daily ration for prisoners at the reception camp amounted to 3,400 calories, nearly equal to that of American logistical troops. For those who had just left the Tunisian battlefield, where Wehrmacht dry rations had dropped to 1,200 calories, the difference was a physical shock. In the afternoon, doctors continued interviewing prisoners about their pre-war health. One officer asked, "Have you ever been seriously wounded?" Butcher replied, "Yes, at El Alamein, I was hit in the leg by shrapnel." The doctor took notes, then added, "We'll keep you on the watch list to prevent recurring infection." In the Army Medical Corps records, Norfolk Branch, 1943, Butcher's case was listed as healed wound, stable, no infection. Such meticulousness left many prisoners uneasy. They were not accustomed to being treated as genuine patients. The final step of the reception process was religious registration. An American sergeant stood behind a desk and asked in German, "What is your faith?" Some answered, "Catholic," "Protestant," and others stayed silent. The sergeant added, "If you are Jewish, we have a kosher kitchen." A dry laugh rippled from the back of the line. Many thought it was a joke. But it wasn't. He made a serious note. Following U.S. War Department Circular 210-5, 1943. The document stipulated that all prisoners had the right to retain their faith, receive appropriate food, and have access to chaplains or rabbis upon request. That night, the prisoners were taken to their sleeping quarters. Each had a separate bed, white sheets, a thick blanket, and a pillow smelling faintly of soap. A middle-aged German officer muttered, "This is better than the barracks in Kassel." According to the War Department Housing Standards, 1943, each prisoner was allotted 40 square feet of living space, exceeding the Geneva requirement of 27 square feet. A soft yellow light spread across the orderly rows of beds. In the corner, a radio broadcast news of the day. There were no propaganda speakers, no shouted orders. Guy Matro concluded in his summary to Geneva in August 1943, "The American treatment of prisoners reflects an understanding that victory is measured not only by battles won, but by values maintained." When rereading that sentence after the war, Butcher wrote in the margin, "We understood too late." The shock of that day came not from hardship, but from systematic compassion, something no German training program had prepared them for. According to the International Red Cross Annual Summary, 1944, the illness rate among German prisoners in the United States was below 0.5%, and the mortality rate only 0.02%, the lowest in the entire World War II POW system. Those figures spoke not only of medicine, but of the philosophy of war itself. In the same year, across Europe, tens of thousands of Soviet prisoners died in German camps, with mortality rates exceeding 60% in many places. This stark contrast became the clearest historical evidence of what came to be called the paradox of humanity. As night fell, wind from the Chesapeake Bay drifted through the barbed wire fences, carrying the scent of salt and machine oil. In the quiet barracks, Butcher turned on his bed, listening to the faint sound of the radio. The announcer's voice read, "American troops advancing in Sicily." He didn't understand everything, but he realized he had become part of that machine, a machine that conquered by treating its enemies with decency. And in that quiet room, he began to understand what defeat truly meant. On the morning of the 6th of June 1943, the first train carrying German prisoners of war departed Norfolk toward the interior. Each carriage held about 40 men, equipped with cushioned seats, large windows, fabric curtains, and ventilation. Butcher sat by the window, eyes following the trees along the tracks. "They did not lock us in freight cars," he wrote in his memoir, "behind barbed wire, 1952, but in carriages as if meant for tourists." According to the U.S. Army Transportation Corps logbook, June 1943, the train traveled for 3 days, passing through Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Harrisburg, and Pittsburgh, before branching toward camps in Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas. When the train stopped at Union Station, Washington, D.C., the scene on the platform left many prisoners speechless. Hundreds of civilians were there to send soldiers off to the front, women in floral dresses, children waving small flags. A young woman ran after a soldier, kissed him quickly, and laughed as the whistle drowned out their voices. While in Europe, train stations had become places of farewell in darkness and fear. Here they were filled with music, newspapers, coffee, and well-wishes. According to the Union Station operational record, June 1943, more than 20,000 passengers passed through daily, including 4,000 servicemen seen off in public ceremonies. No one tried to hide the war, but no one allowed it to consume life either. Through the window, Butcher saw Americans eating, talking, and laughing beside train cars guarded by soldiers. "They looked at us not with hatred, but with curiosity," he wrote. A newspaper boy waved and shouted, "Hi, Jerry," making the entire car burst into laughter. To them, the prisoners were not symbols of guilt, but part of a larger picture of victory drawing near. According to the U.S. War Department Psychological Evaluation Memo 1944, many German prisoners described feeling disoriented by normalcy, a sense of losing direction amid the ordinariness of wartime America. As the train passed through Baltimore, The right side window opened onto a vast industrial landscape, the Glen L. Martin aircraft plant appeared, with long rows of freshly painted B-26 Marauders glistening in the sunlight. The parking lots were filled with civilian cars, factory signs hung openly, and there were no barbed wire fences or armed guards. "They do not hide their power," a German officer murmured. "They display it with confidence." According to the Glen L. Martin Company production report, June 1943, the plant produced an average of 18 aircraft per day, equivalent to the monthly output of a German factory in Kassel. The open display of industrial might as an everyday activity revealed an absolute faith in domestic security, something unknown in the culture of Nazi Germany's total war. As the train left Baltimore, the scenery changed swiftly. Residential neighborhoods stretched along the tracks, white-painted wooden houses, small gardens, flagpoles at the doors. Passing through Pennsylvania, the flames from the steel mills of Bethlehem and Harrisburg dyed the night sky red. According to the Pennsylvania Railroad Report, July 1943, steel mills operated 24 hours a day, supplying more than 35% of America's strategic steel. Butcher gazed through the glass, seeing workers leaving their shifts, lunch pails in hand, stepping out from factories glowing like daylight. "They looked as if leaving a theatre, not a shift," he wrote, "and I thought, perhaps this is what freedom looks like." At the Harrisburg station, a small incident left an indelible mark on him. A young worker threw away a half-eaten apple, then took another from his pocket. That simple act stunned the prisoners. In the Tunisian desert, they had fought over dried orange peels. "This man could discard what we once traded lives for," Butcher recounted. According to the Pennsylvania State Agricultural Bureau, 1943, that year's apple yield reached 97 million bushels, more than the total pre-war production of all Germany. It was not merely a material difference, but a gulf between two systems of thought. On the second evening, the train entered the Appalachian Highlands. Through the window, the lights of small towns flickered across the hills. There were no curfews, no homes darkened in fear of air raids. According to the U.S. Civil Defense Office, 1943, outside the East Coast, there had been no bombings that forced civilians into shelters, and only 12% of cities conducted periodic air raid drills. To the Germans, living amid lights during wartime bordered on blasphemy, a naked form of pride. On the final night, the train rolled across the Midwest, the sound of iron wheels beating like a steady heart. A prisoner whispered, "If they fight with machines like this, then we have truly lost." There was no reply, only the long sigh that travelled through each car. They understood that America was waging war with a strength beyond military vision, the strength of stability. According to the U.S. Transportation Corps Summary Report, 1944, between 1943, 1945, more than 425,000 German prisoners were safely transported to over 500 camps across the United States, without a single attack or act of sabotage on the railway routes. That figure reflected the system's total control, but also what Butcher finally noted in his journal: "I saw a nation that does not need to display its power, because power has seeped into everything it does." No. And from that window, the empire of fear began to crumble. In December 1942, before the first group of prisoners from Europe arrived in the United States, the U.S. War Department constructed an experimental detention camp in the state of Texas. Its official name was Camp Hearne, located in Robertson County, more than 100 miles from the city of Houston. According to the War Department construction records, 1943, the camp covered 720 acres and was designed to hold up to 4,800 German prisoners. Rows of barbed wire fences ran along the red earth, enclosing lines of yellow-painted wooden barracks, each equipped with electricity, fans, hot water, and shared bathrooms. In the technical report, the camp's electrical system was described as equivalent to a small-town grid, consuming more than 250 kilowatts per day. Butcher and his group of prisoners arrived at Hearne in early July 1943 after a 3-day train journey. When the truck stopped before the gate, they saw a large wooden sign reading, "Prisoner of War Camp, U.S. Army." Above the gate flew the American flag, beside it the crimson Geneva flag. The guard on duty, his skin tanned and rifle slung across his back, smiled faintly, a gesture that startled Butcher. "It was the first smile we saw behind barbed wire," he recorded. According to the Camp Hearne administrative log, July 1943, the first group of 2,200 prisoners was divided into 8 sections, each with its own kitchen, sports field, and a small library funded by the Red Cross. The structure of the camp was organized as a miniature social model. Self-government within surveillance, a phrase appearing in War Department Memorandum No. 24/1943, described the experimental self-governing system first tested at Camp Hearne. Each barracks elected a barracks leader, usually an educated non-commissioned officer, responsible for maintaining order, organizing labor assignments, and managing cultural activities. Voting was conducted publicly under the supervision of American military police, and the results were recorded in administrative files. For those who had lived under a dictatorship, the concept of electing a representative was strange. Butcher wrote, "I saw the American Guard hand us the ballot box. For the first time in my life, I voted without fearing someone behind my back." Inside the camp, functional areas were precisely planned. According to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers report, 1943, each barracks contained 20 bunk beds, a 60-watt bulb for each bed, a central gas heater, and 2 200-gallon hot water tanks. The reading room had light-colored wooden walls, its shelves lined with hundreds of novels and English-language textbooks. Outside were a volleyball court, ping-pong tables, and even a small stage for performances. Some prisoners who had been artists or teachers organized classes on history, mathematics, and language. From this initiative arose the concept of the Barbed Wire University, recorded in the Special Projects Division Summary, 1944, as a wartime social education experiment. The medical system at Camp Hearne was described as exemplary. According to the International Red Cross Medical Inspection, September 1943, the ratio of doctors met the 1/500 standard, twice the Geneva requirement. The infirmary had 3 sections: general treatment, surgery, and dentistry. The report detailed that the first operation took place on the 10th of September 1943, performed by Army surgeon Captain William Calhoun, together with 2 German prisoner doctors. The patient, Sergeant Georg Gärtner, suffered from appendicitis. The surgery succeeded, and the patient recovered after 7 days. The Red Cross concluded, "Facilities and surgical standards are equal to civilian hospitals." The infirmary also contained an X-ray machine and a stock of penicillin, flown in monthly from Dallas. In the Swiss delegation field note, October 1943, Inspector Emil Sandström described Camp Hearne as a model of humane efficiency. He wrote, "The living conditions here surpass all Allied nations, including Canada and Britain. Prisoners have electric light, hot water, nutritious food, and diverse recreation." At the time of inspection, the average ration amounted to 3,500 calories per day, including meat, milk, vegetables, and fresh fruit, all supplied by the U.S. Army's logistics system. The number of letters sent abroad that month reached 4,200, reflecting the preservation of communication rights. At night, as the lights in the barracks flicked on, the sound of a harmonica drifted from a corner. Butcher recalled, "I heard an old soldier play Lili Marleen, but this time it no longer sounded sad. It sounded like a farewell to the past." Some prisoners painted, others read newspapers or wrote letters. The guards patrolled slowly, rarely interfering. "They watched from a distance, not to control but to observe," Butcher wrote. The self-governing system ran so smoothly that the Americans needed only to maintain an external framework of oversight, while inside, the prisoners regulated themselves through collective agreement. According to the War Department Psychological Study, 1944, Camp Hearne was classified as a low-tension detention model, where the rule violation rate was below 0.05%, with virtually no incidents of violence. American officials regarded it as proof that discipline could be sustained through personal responsibility rather than coercion. When the inspection delegation left the camp in November 1943, Emil Sandstrom wrote in his final report, "If there is a place that proves democracy can exist behind barbed wire, it is Hearne." In that calm setting, Butcher began to perceive another paradox. "We came to learn how to lose," he wrote, "but they taught us how to live." And when night fell over the Texas plains, the yellow lights in the barracks reflected off the wire fence, standing as a quiet testament to a simple yet powerful idea. The strength of democracy lies in voluntary order, not in fear. And beneath that quiet glow, the lessons of freedom began. In the autumn of 1943, after the prisoner of war camp system in Texas had stabilized, the U.S. War Department and the Federal War Manpower Office issued new directives, allowing German prisoners to participate in civilian production within non-military areas. According to the War Manpower Commission report, September 1943, more than 87% of labor-eligible prisoners were mobilized to work in agriculture, food processing, and light industry. At Camp Hearne, each prisoner was paid $0, 80 per day in canteen coupons, the equivalent of an American private's wage. That figure was not merely symbolic income, but a declaration of principle. Work was a right, not a punishment. The first groups of prisoners were sent to farms around Robertson County. They harvested cotton, corn, and peanuts, sometimes under the supervision of local farmers rather than military police. "They gave me a plow and trusted I would come back," Butcher recalled in his memoir, "Behind barbed wire, 1952. I didn't understand why they trusted me, but I did come back." According to Record Group 389, Prisoner of War Labor Program, the escape rate among working prisoners in Texas was less than 0.1%, a figure that astonished German authorities when they read post-war reports. Among the labor sites, the most notable was King Ranch in Kingsville, Texas, a vast estate spanning 825,000 acres, larger than the entire state of Rhode Island. It was a symbol of American mechanized agriculture. The King Ranch operations record, 1943. 1945, noted an average of 300 German prisoners working alongside Mexican and African American laborers in cattle herding, fence repair, and cotton harvesting. "I saw white men, black men, and Spanish-speaking men working together, eating lunch under the same tree," Butcher wrote. "In Germany, that would be a crime. Here, it was just another workday." The racial mixture of labor made the prisoners realize that productivity depended not on skin color, but on organization and mutual respect. American technology left them awestruck. At King Ranch, combine harvesters ran day and night, each one replacing 40 manual laborers. According to the Agricultural Production Bulletin, 1944, wheat and cotton yields in Texas increased by 25%, thanks to the combined effect of prisoner labor and mechanization. In factories, the numbers were even more impressive. The Hearne Cotton Oil Mill, where Butcher worked for several months, processed in a single day as much cotton as a German mill could handle in a month. American workers labored in a relaxed atmosphere, with music playing from radios, scheduled breaks, and full lunches. "I saw them laugh when a machine broke down, while in Germany one would be punished for that," Butcher wrote. "Discipline here came from pride, not fear." One of the most striking sights was the Alcoa Rockdale aluminum plant, about 60 miles from Hearne, where prisoners were assigned to collect and sort scrap. According to the Alcoa Internal Production Report, December 1944, the daily aluminum waste there exceeded a week's output of Nazi Germany's production. They saw gleaming sheets of aluminum discarded simply because they were off by a few millimeters in size. For engineers once devoted to the German war industry, it was unthinkable waste, but also undeniable proof of an industry so abundant it could afford excess. In May 1944, a delegation from the Swiss Red Cross inspected labor sites across Texas. The report stated, German POWs express astonishment that they are paid and treated with respect while working outside military facilities. The word astonishment was underlined in the original text. For many, labor was not coercion, but a lesson in civil order. On the farms, prisoners had frequent contact with American civilians. One noon, while Butcher was loading cotton sacks, he overheard two farmers arguing about fuel prices. One shouted, "Roosevelt is ruining the farmers." The other laughed, "Then don't vote for him again." That simple exchange stunned Butcher. If anyone had said that about Hitler, he would have vanished overnight, he wrote. According to the FBI monitoring report, 1,944, many German prisoners recounted their shock at seeing Americans criticize the government without fear of arrest. It was their first tangible encounter with something they had never comprehended: freedom of speech. By the end of 1945, when the labor program concluded, the War Department Economic Assessment recorded that German prisoners had contributed over 45 million man-hours, generating an estimated $240 million in value to the wartime U.S. economy. Yet the true value, as Butcher wrote, did not lie in wages but in what we learned. He penned the final line in his diary before leaving Hearne. We came to work, but we left knowing that freedom is not a privilege, it is a habit practiced every day. And on those open fields, freedom was no longer an idea. It was a rhythm they could feel in their hands. In early 1944, Camp Hearne entered the second stage of its democratic experiment, to education. While the war still raged in Europe, America quietly built a learning system for those who had once fought against it. According to the Special Projects Division report, February 1944, the program titled Education and Reorientation for Prisoners of War was implemented at 38 camps across the country, with Hearne as its central site. The camp's library, which had initially contained only 500 books, most donated by residents, reached 5,000 volumes by mid-1945, thanks to the Books for Prisoners initiative organized by the American Library Association. Pinewood shelves were erected between the barracks, with bilingual signs reading, Lisa Saal, Reading Room. Prisoners could borrow books for 3 days and were instructed to sign and record their names. Titles such as All Quiet on the Western Front by Erich Maria Remarque and The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann, banned in Germany, appeared on the shelves. My hands trembled as I held them, Butcher wrote in his memoir, Behind Barbed Wire, 1952. At home, owning even one copy would have been enough to be arrested. There were also works by Stefan Zweig, Leon Feuchtwanger, and Jewish writers whose books had been burned by the Nazis. According to the U.S. Library Program Summary, 1944, the goal of the program was to expose prisoners to the diversity of human thought as a vaccine against totalitarianism. Reading soon led to the demand for formal study. Sam Houston State Teachers College, located 60 miles from Camp Hearne, began offering correspondence courses to the prisoners. School records stated that between March 1944 and August 1945, 340 German prisoners enrolled in courses on English, mathematics, U.S. history, and agricultural science. Professors visited the camp once a month for lectures, grading other assignments by mail. In a letter, Professor Harold V. Tees Rhodes, the program's supervisor, wrote, "They study not to escape boredom, but to understand the system that defeated them." According to the Texas Educational Review, 1946, this was the first time in modern history that a university-level program had been opened to prisoners of war. In a makeshift classroom built from wooden boards, Butcher sat listening to a lecture on the American Constitution. The instructor, Lieutenant John F. Combe Mercer, a former high school teacher and veteran of the North African campaign, began, "Freedom is not anarchy. It is an order sustained by consent." The statement left the class silent. Afterward, a German officer asked, Do you believe the enemy can learn that? Mercer replied. I'm not teaching enemies, I'm teaching people. Such exchanges, recorded in the Camp Hearne Educational Log, 1944, illustrated the American educational philosophy and practice. Rather than indoctrination, they created an environment for prisoners to reason for themselves. That same year, the psychological reorientation program began under Major Maxwell McKnight, a military psychologist. His report dated November 1944 stated, 60% of non-political prisoners show measurable movement toward democratic ideals after 6 months of exposure. The interviews were conducted discreetly, based on 3 criteria: reactions to news of Germany's defeats, reading choices, and participation in collective activities. Those demonstrating democratic tendencies were assigned roles such as study club organizers or editors of the camp newspaper. According to Psychological Evaluation Series No. 71945, this method of indirect persuasion proved more effective than any direct propaganda. Alongside the classes came the birth of the camp newspaper Der Spiegel, unrelated to the post-war German magazine. The first issue, printed in September 1943, was filled with Nazi slogans, but by the end of 1944, it featured poems, short stories, and debates about morality in war. Butcher contributed to the column Letters from the Barracks, writing about a prisoner who learned English through the radio and discovered that freedom was a sound before it was an idea. Copies of the newspaper are preserved in the Army Heritage and Education Center, annotated by a Swiss inspector. This camp has achieved a genuine civil discourse among enemies. Freedom of expression also found its way into the camp's internal radio station. Each evening, the program Evening Hour broadcast news and jazz music, interspersed with educational announcements. Prisoners could request songs, sometimes Moonlight Serenade or Begin the Beguine. An American technician joked, "It's the only German station where Glenn Miller plays every night." Music became an invisible bridge between 2 worlds. According to the Signal Corps Archive, 1945, each camp had its own speaker system, but the content was loosely censored to encourage self-expression without political restraint. By the end of 1945, when the program concluded, the Special Projects Division reported that more than 31,000 prisoners across the United States had participated in the courses. 18,000 studied English, 12,000 studied agriculture, and 6,200 studied administration. The political recidivism rate among them was below 2%. For the Germans, Camp Hearne was no longer a prison but a vast school where defeat was transformed into a lesson. On his final evening before being transferred, Butcher sat on the barracks steps, reading the last line of The Magic Mountain. Understanding is the beginning of freedom. He closed the book and looked beyond the fence where the lights of Hearne flickered in the distance. There, in Texas, in the midst of war, he realized that freedom was not taught through slogans, but through the ability to listen, to speak, and to think. And beyond the wire, the lessons echoed quiet, persistent, and utterly human. In the spring of 1946, as the guns fell silent and the world began to account for its losses, the U.S. War Department released a report over 300 pages long on the condition of German prisoners of war. Within it were figures that astonished both the military and scholars alike. 74% of the 425,000 prisoners surveyed stated they had a favorable view of the American democratic system, 61% supported the Marshall Plan, and 55% agreed that a German-American alliance is essential for European peace. These statistics, drawn from the Office of Military Government Report, Germany, 1947, were considered the first evidence of the success of the re-education program within the POW camps. Those dry numbers told a deeper story, the transformation of an entire generation. According to the post-war sociological survey, Bonn 1950, within 10 years after the war, thousands of former American-held prisoners played crucial roles in shaping West Germany's democracy. Specific data showed that 48 former POWs became Bundestag members, 312 served as mayors or city councillors, 1,847 became agricultural engineers, 2,341 became teachers, and 4,165 became entrepreneurs who adopted American management models. In a 1965 interview, former prisoner Hans-Georg von Studnitz, who later became an industrialist, said, "We did not learn the philosophy of democracy from books, but from the way Americans treated the defeated." Several figures left a clear imprint on the two post-war decades. Hermann Butcher, the soldier who once wrote in Behind Barbed Wire that freedom is the discipline of trust, emigrated to the United States in 1953. He began working as an engineer for General Motors, obtained U.S. citizenship in 1958, and later joined post-war German-American industrial cooperation projects. When asked why he left Germany, he replied simply, "I wanted to live in a place where people argue instead of obey." Another case was Georg Gärtner, a prisoner who escaped from the Deming, New Mexico camp in 1945 and lived under the name Dennis F. Wiles for 40 years. He married an American woman, worked as a sports instructor in California, and surrendered in 1985 at the age of 64. His autobiography, Hitler's Last Soldier in America, 1986, recounted his life as living proof of the allure of American freedom. "I did not run away from America. I ran away from the idea that I had no right to be a man." Reinhold Peel, another prisoner once held at Camp Washington, Illinois, also chose to stay. He escaped in 1945, lived secretly within the German community in Chicago for 7 years, then surrendered and was pardoned. In 1959, he became a U.S. citizen, opened a printing business, and later sponsored German-American student exchange programs. Records from the Immigration and Naturalization Service, 1960, show that more than 5,000 former prisoners were granted legal residency, 92% of whom obtained citizenship within the legal period. All had stable employment records, no criminal convictions, and a higher home ownership rate than immigrants of the same era. Meanwhile, in Germany, the American Occupation Administration continued to monitor reintegration progress. The U.S. Military Government Education Division Report, 1948, concluded that prisoners formerly held in America demonstrated greater tolerance and civic organizational capacity than those repatriated from the Soviet Union or France. They became the nucleus of the Volkshochschule movement, the new community school system of post-war Germany. Among them, many carried with them memories of Camp Hearne as a miniature model of democratic organization. We learned how to vote, how to debate, and how to lose without losing dignity, one former prisoner wrote in Der Spiegel, March 1954. The International Red Cross reached a similar conclusion in its ICRC inspection summary, 1946. The United States stands as the only nation that transformed prisoner camps into schools of democracy. The sentence was quoted repeatedly in later historical works and regarded as Switzerland's official acknowledgement of American humanitarian standards. Inspector Emil Sandstrom, who had visited Hearne, added a handwritten note in the margin. Their victory was not won on the battlefield, but in the hearts of those who once lost. As the Cold War began, the influence of that experience continued to spread. Many former prisoners participated in NATO and international exchange programs. The State Department brief, 1952, recorded that more than 23% of ex-prisoners maintained correspondence with American families who had helped them, an act of spontaneous citizen diplomacy that helped mend relations between the two nations. In Texas, the Hearne Heritage League preserved hundreds of Christmas cards sent from Germany over 40 years, the last arriving in 2001, signed, "Your former prisoners." Modern historians regard Camp Hearne as one of the few successful social experiments of the 20th century. Historian Arnold Kramer wrote in Nazi Prisoners of War in America, 1979, "America proved that democracy can exist even within a system of confinement." Judith Gansberg added in Stalag USA, 1977. The prison camp became a laboratory of freedom, where the right to learn and to err proved stronger than any army. When Butcher returned to Germany in 1960 as a technical consultant, he visited a school in Hamburg where students had hung a map of Texas on the wall with the words, Camp Hearne, the first lesson of freedom. He stood silent for a moment, then told the principal, "They didn't capture us. They educated us." The quote, published in the Hamburger Abendblatt in 1961, became a familiar reference in essays on Germany's reconstruction. Those once seen as enemies had become bridges between two civilizations. In the 1982nd, German-American POW associations held regular reunions. In 1984, on the 40th anniversary of D-Day, 50 former Camp Hearne prisoners returned to Texas. The Hearne Democrat reported that they laid flowers at the American Veterans Memorial and sang Silent Night in both German and English. One of them, Fritz Zimmermann, said, "We came here as enemies, left as men, and returned as friends." Oh! As history closed its chapter, the legacy of those years remained intact in archives, in letters, and in personal memory. No political slogan could achieve what normalcy, trust, and humanity accomplished at Camp Hearne. It was where war became a classroom, and victory was not measured by fallen enemies but by transformed human beings. And so, from behind the barbed wire, the story of defeat became the blueprint of alliance,